A qualified consultant for inspection of the 2021 street improvement program, Mr. Schoonover.
So 133 and 134 are both very similar, the inspection piece and then the resurfacing piece, and I'll have Kurt talk a little bit about the streets that were chosen, and I think the list was in the packet if everyone saw that.
Yes, it was.
Yeah, good evening. So the first piece of legislation here is for the inspection. So we'll advertise, we'll put a request for qualifications in the newspaper. We're going to try to coincide with the construction advertisement. So we'll select a consultant and move forward with that. The second resolution, or do I want to talk about one at a time here?
No, go ahead.
So the 13420, that is for the construction contract for the 2021 street improvement program. The list of streets were attached to that legislation, and I'll read them. We went through our usual criteria for selecting the streets: traffic, pavement condition, funding source, a lot of coordination with other departments. We spent a lot of time coordinating with Lancaster Gas and Lancaster Water. Those are the two that kind of, gas has their projects. We like to make sure that they're in there first before we come in and pave it, so that we're not cutting up our new asphalt for gas lines or water lines. So that has a lot to do with it, particularly on some of these streets, because we're trying to get into a part of town that we've been kind of putting off. So we're kind of chasing the gas project. So there are Oakwood and Medill. We've got to time things up. Those are two streets. They're on our list, and they're also in the neighborhood of the gas line improvements, but we'll be able to coordinate those efforts. A lot of the streets, we've gotten some of our higher ADT streets, streets with more traffic. A lot of those are finished. So now we're getting into some of the neighborhood streets, so it won't be quite as visible as some of our other projects. Last year we did Broad Street. Everybody drives on Broad Street, so it's, it's out there. People are seeing the work that's getting done. This list was submitted, I think, back in August, September. We decided on the streets. I think the mayor's put it out there on social media. Oakwood Avenue from Wheeling to Frederick, King Street from North High to North Maple, Mount Pleasant from East 6th to East Fair, Ohio Avenue from Cedar Hill to West 6th Avenue, West 6th Avenue from Shoshone to Ohio, Union Street from Alameda to West Mulberry, Frederick Street from Sheridan to Clayton, East Fair from Sheridan to the end, Alameda from Shoshone to the end, Shawnee from Cedar Hill to Union, Huffer from Sheridan to James, Kerr from Sheridan to Clayton, Clayton from Frederick to Lynn, Lynn from Grandstaff to Clayton, and Medill from East 6th Avenue to East Fair Avenue. And those last 5 streets are all alternate streets. We typically do that so that we can, depending on the bids come in, we'll do them all, we'll do part of them, so that we're paving as much as we can without going over our budgeted amount. The last 2 years we've done all of the alternates. The bids lately have been really good. We bid a paving project in the spring that was probably 20% under the engineer's estimate. We just bid, that was Fair Ave and the Shelley Company. We just bid the next phase a few weeks ago, and it was even lower. So the market's great right now for bidding these paving projects, and I'd like to bid this in January, so I'm asking for 2 readings for this one.
Okay. Yes, Melody?
I know January's just right around the corner, but you just said that how good the market is right now. I'd like to suspend. So you can get it done in
Yeah.
December yet.
Yeah, that would move it up a couple weeks because I probably won't run it in the paper until after the holidays. But it would buy me, get it out a couple weeks early. We would be ready to do that, yeah. If that's
I'm
what-
with her.
I agree.
That'll work. I'll ask for suspension.
Thank you.
Well,
Okay, anything else on 133 and 134, since they're tied together? I have, myself on 133 as the second, and I have Mr. James on 134 as the second.
yep.
Okay. Alright. Next, we have temporary resolution 135-20. This is, a resolution authorizing the Service Safety Director to enter into an engineering agreement for the preliminary study. This will allow for Arcadis to begin their preliminary study coming through water pollution control. Mr. James.
I would like to yield some time to Ms. Denise Cruz to discuss this a little more. Certainly, the old plant on Memorial Drive has actually outpaced its useful life, and they're looking at having to make some decisions on some of the filter beds, unfortunately, on the old system. Now I think it's time. Denise, please go ahead.
Thank you. So we are seeing some significant development pressure out in the US 33 service area. And one of the things that is going to require is for us to look at production at the Miller Park plant. So what this study will do is evaluate what we can do, replace or renovate. We don't think it'll be a renovate, we think it's a replacement, but we gotta figure out where to replace it at, if it be the other end of Miller Park or if it be another location. So we went through a request for qualifications and selected the team of Arcadis and Burgess and Nyepel. Arcadis has obviously been with us a long time, and Burgess and Nyepel has also done water work for the city for a long time. In fact, they did the last Miller Park upgrade. So over the next 6 months, we're gonna be coming up with the preliminary study and narrowing down some decisions to go into the summer, and then start on well field evaluations and design of the replacement water plant.
Yes, Mr. Stoughton.
What's our daily production out of that plant?
At Miller Park,
Yeah.
it's currently between 4 and 5 MGD a day.
And then our south plant, I know we're not,
Our south plant is about 2.5.
are we still on one skid down there, or we fired up two?
They fired up a second one,
Okay.
and it's intermediate. That relates to the concentrate line project that we're working on.
And I assume we would probably look at the same types of capacity if we build a new one?
We would be looking at about 6 to 8 MGD. The Miller Park well field is sized for 8 MGD, so obviously if we stay there,
Okay.
we'll be good. We'll be looking for something very close to that, because as I told the consultants, I can't just worry about this next 4.5 MGD. I gotta worry about the 4.5 MGD after that and
Yep.
where it's gonna go.
With you. Very good, thank you.
Okay, any other questions? And I'm showing this is for 2 readings, and Mr. Hall is your second.
That is correct.
Okay. Next one is temporary resolution 136-20, again coming through water pollution control. This is for the Wiley Road Loop project. Mr. James.
Once again, I'd like to yield some time to Ms. Denise Cruz to discuss this further.
All right. So our current situation is we have a water line that goes out to US 33 and across 33 to a water tank, and it's the only feed to that water tank. So while we've looped lines within the city, we don't have another loop that crosses 33 that we can keep that water line in, or that water tank in service if something happens. And for industrial use, having a redundant and reliable system is very important. So what we want to do is loop the existing line on Wiley Road back into the Rockville Industrial Park. And that will take a water line loop that goes under 33, probably through the Rubel Corporate Park and back to Wiley. We're looking at some models to see how far we actually have to upgrade that line. So this contract is with Burgess and Eiffel. And this will design that water line loop and see us through construction on that.
Okay, any questions? All right, and again, I have 2 readings, and I have Mrs. Teener as your second.
That is correct.
All right,
Thank you.
Thanks.
thank you. Moving on to temporary resolution 137-20. This is coming through service. This has to do with the pressure system for a gas main replacement project.
And I'll have Kurt speak on this. He's taken over for Mike Pettit at the gas department. I don't know, have you been here yet?
I was here
Just-
last meeting.
Yeah,
You know, this year has just been like, I don't remember anything. I don't know. I was 2 weeks.
I'm very forgettable.
No.
You should be so lucky.
But, yeah, the gas department's looking to go out to bid for a 3-year gas line replacement project. Really, this is a continuation of efforts the gas department's been making over the last 10 years to replace its aging infrastructure, including bare steel pipelines and low-pressure systems. Replacement initiatives due to various requirements and recommendations made to the gas industry over the years by the Pipeline Hazards and Safety Materials Administration, Public Utilities Commission of Ohio, and the Environmental Protection Agency. You should all have a handout. You know, it's got a map, and then there's like a table, like a little Excel table on it, kind of gives you the details of the project. If you take a look at the map, you can see there's 3 distinct areas that are on the map that we're looking at replacing the lines on. First, the 500 to 1,000 block of King, and then East Mulberry on the 500 to 900 block. And then we're hitting up all the cross streets that are up through there, like North Mount Pleasant, that little section there, Northeast Wood Avenue. We've got Oakwood out there that we're hitting up to. Kind of our second area includes Franklin Avenue, Harding Avenue, Medill Avenue, and also East 6th Avenue from Madison to Cherry. Then the third area is out east, and that would include Pleasant View Drive, Lynn Drive, and Concordia Drive. For the most part, these new areas are directly east and southeast of the work that we just concluded. It was called the North Central Replacement Project. That was the area just south of the fairgrounds, going from Columbus Street all the way over to Madison, Fair Avenue down to Mulberry. That just concluded. We actually just retired that line today and finished that project. There's still a few things hanging around there, some concrete work that needs to be done, a little bit of asphalt work, but still working on some of that. But the biggest part of that project's been completed. Once these proposed sections are replaced, as you can see, we're looking at 5.1 miles of bare steel. That's approximately 45% of what we have left. We have about 12 miles of bare steel left in our system. We'll have that eliminated. It'll be replaced with new PE pipe. We plan on installing the majority of that PE pipe in the curb lawn, so that'll keep us from conflicting with any of the pavement projects or anything like that in the future. Project's going to include replacement of 692 services, nearly 300 of which are located inside customers' houses. These meters are going to be moved to the outside of the customer's home, and the reason we do this is both for accessibility purposes for our meter readers out there so they can see the meters and they don't have to get into customers' houses, and also for safety reasons. But hoping to begin work around April 1st, 2021, so we can get out in front of some of the pavement projects that Kurt talked about. We want to start the contractor on Oakwood and Medill, coordinating with them. We do have the funds accounted for in the 2021 budget, and it will be available for this work pending approval of the 2021 budget.
Okay, any questions for Kirk? Okay, I have Mrs. Bobbitt as your second, and I have 3 readings.
3 readings, yes.
Okay.
That's still okay, right? 3 readings? Watch the chair.
Great. Okay, next resolution is 138-20. This is to submit an amendment for the fiscal year 2020 annual action plan for CDBG, coming through economic development. Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, well, this is good news. We've been awarded $528,158 for CDBG eligible pandemic-related expenses. And this award would allow us to do some, I guess, giving some money to the community, people in need specifically. There's a working capital portion of this for small businesses, looking at businesses under 25 employees, targeting specifically smaller businesses, probably under 5, but it is eligible for up to 25 employees, looking at grants to help pay rent, mortgage payments, and/or utilities, specifically for those businesses affected by COVID-19. Also, a portion of this grant would be used for residential homeowners and for people having difficulty paying their bills, such as mortgage, rent, utilities. I know we formed a committee that would look at these applications, and Treasurer Wolfinger's on that committee. Have I covered that fairly well, or do you have additional input?
Would you like some more comments from the council?
That's a,
Okay
sure.
with it?
But this is an opportunity to help people in need right now. We're going to ask for 2 readings. I know Linda is out of the office, and I believe she wants to roll with this as soon as she gets back. This money is coming our way specifically for people in need right now, so.
Is there a reason why you would not suspend?
She suggested 2 readings. I just went with her suggestions. I think it's money in. I have no problem with a suspension. Would that help her, Bob, get moving forward?
Yeah, I think Linda was concerned of how council would react to multiple suspensions. She knows this has been going on. I think the quicker we get this in place, the committee can move forward and start accepting applications for the program. So I would support that.
Great.
I'm sorry.
I'm going to ask Mr. Stoughton a second, so I would support suspension.
Yeah, I would too. Bob, I have a few questions. I mean, this money just came at us, right? And so what would a typical grant from this be from the committee?
The committee's met a couple times. There's about 7 individuals on the committee, community-type individuals, and to set and establish the criteria. And what we've discussed would be grants up to $10,000. Like Don said.
For businesses, right? And then
They're businesses,
and
yes.
individuals would be a little bit different.
And they can be used for utility payments. They do not have to be delinquent per the COVID program. If they're in distress, it could be rent assistance, debt payment assistance, things of that nature.
So part of you as a committee basically is determining, what type of immediate need that they need, I suspect, right?
That is correct.
To authorize, okay. Well, this is great. I mean,
Yeah, I
yes,
think it's
I'm okay
great.
with suspension on it. I mean, why not?
Yeah, it's, we looked at 5,000 and we looked at 10,000. Obviously, at the numbers you have, you'd have, 30, 31 businesses at 10,000. You would have twice that many at 5,000. So we kind of left it that up to 10,000. If we had a very unique situation, I think the flexibility is there to to meet the needs of that particular company. We'd like to do the 5, as Don indicated. Could be bigger, depends on the impact of the employees within the business.
In addition, we have the homeowner foreclosure portion too for individuals out there in need.
Good, that's good.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we'll change that to suspension, and then, Mr. Stoughton will be second. Okay. Temporary resolution 139-20, this is for the, Safe Routes to School program to extend the sidewalks along Sheridan Drive, coming through Public Works, Mr. Schoonover.
Yep, sorry, I was writing stuff down. Kurt's gonna come up and talk about this, but this is the second half of the Sheridan Drive sidewalk, if you will.
Yeah, so this is an ODOT-led project. We've been, things take a while with ODOT. We've been talking about this for probably 2 or 3 years. It's been in design, it's gone through phase submittals through ODOT, and we're finally to the point now where we're gonna bid it out in January and build it this summer. It goes from, it's along Sheridan Drive, it goes from, starts at Frederick and goes to the elementary school. From Frederick to Fair is an alternate, because if we go over our funds, then the city has to come up with the money. It's a, I don't know if it's state or federal money, but it's grant money. And if we go over, then we have to come up with that balance. I don't think we will, based on the estimate that ODOT's done, and they've done all the engineering. This isn't a, like I said, it's ODOT-led, so they're kind of running with it. The resolution is to enter into an agreement. They call it I think it's the final legislation, because we just did back in July, I think, preliminary legislation.
Yeah.
They sent this to us this past week. We rushed to try to get it on the agenda so that we could have this agreement, and not delay the bid.
Okay, any questions? I'm the second, and we're gonna suspend, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Last resolution of the evening, temporary resolution 140-20. This is a resolution to amend the 2020 budgets. Gotta love it. Every year we do this. So, Tricia?
This is a fun-loving annual piece that I do, that I'm required to do by audit to bring people's expense budgets in line, with the cash that they receive during the year. And 2020 was an unusual year. We have quite a few funds that at this time last year anticipated that they would be receiving more funds or what have you than anticipated, and that did not occur, so we have to lower their expense budget to bring them in line, with the cash. And then we had on, as you can see on the, we had for a change in the software system, capability of processing our VWC payments. So this time last year, I was processing them differently, so I have to lower the budget that I had set this time last year because I didn't need it, because the new software system is processing them in a different fashion. So there's kind of different nuances throughout all the funds, where some we've got have increases because, we got more funds in that I didn't have appropriated from settlements. So I need to add budget so I can get that cash moved to the appropriate fund. And like I said, the general fund, where I have that, from the VWC calculations for 2020, when we moved the police and fire around, I erroneously forgot one account number that's set aside to put VWC for those. I miscalculating on those. But now that we're putting every workers' comp in the cost center, that won't happen, since the new software system automatically calculates it. It's not a manual process. So, these are just, again, annual standard things that I have to bring the expense budget in line.
Any questions for Trish?
Our fun-loving auditor.
Yes. Okay, suspension, of course, and, I have Mr. Stoughton as a second. Are there any other resolutions to come before finance? Okay, we will move on with the ordinances for this evening. Temporary ordinance 33-20. An ordinance to accept the property for Edie Road Safety Project, coming through Public Works, Mr. Schoonover.
Yeah, this is I'll have Mitch come up and discuss, but this is finalizing us, accepting all the pieces that we had been negotiating to get on the little Edie Road project. So I'm sure Mitch is happy to be done with this part. So we'll talk about it for a sec.
Yeah, so I'm pleased to announce that we have acquired all the pieces of property that we need for the Edie Road project. I've been working on this for quite some time, and we had a file date of November 30th, so a couple weeks ago with ODOT, and we actually were able to get these recorded and right before Thanksgiving, so we were able to make our file date. So we're in the midst of getting everything, we've gotten everything up to ODOT. They are filing with central office. It's anticipated that we will bid this project out on February 25th. We're currently working now with all of the utility companies, working on our relocation plans, getting things back on track with relocation. So we're moving forward, and I know that this will be the first of many kind of updates, but I just want to tell council that, you know, we're going to start getting into this bidding process. You know, construction will start occurring out there, and it's going to be a little while before actually, you know, equipment and those types, you know, dirt moving operations start moving and things like that. But, you know, the traffic, I know when I was dealing with the Bush Hill expansion by Fairfield Medical Center, we were having those traffic issues because we have a lot of people that utilize both Memorial and Columbus Street. So we will be working through those issues as construction comes closer. But just, you know, I'm just trying to convey that to be patient when those times come, and this will be the first of many of those kind of updates.
Any questions for Mitch? Or Floyd? Yes, Mr. James?
You did mention that the road will be closed, obviously, to accommodate the changes.
Yeah, Edie Road will be closed between Memorial Drive and North Columbus. There will be access maintained for Hugh White Chevrolet, so that people will actually be able to enter into the Edie Road section and find a way to get into the dealership, but there will be no through traffic whatsoever. That'll be closed off during construction.
Okay, thanks for that clarification. I assumed that, but,
Yeah.
all right, any other questions? Yes, Mr. Uhl.
Thank you. So, it's been a little while
Yes.
that we've been working on this. More than 2 years, less than 3, is that right? Almost 3?
Correct.
Yeah, and so let me just say, because we're going to suspend on this tonight, pass it, stuff's going to get started out there. And so thank you for your work and your diligence on this. I know others like law director, mayor, service safety director, and the administration had something to do with it. It's a big deal. I know it was a ton of work, and I just wanted to say thank you for seeing it through to the end, because we needed this to happen. And I think your continual efforts were a big part of helping to push it forward. So thank you.
Well, thank you, and I want to thank the administration and Randall for helping through this process. It has been a long process that we've been working on this thing, and I think it was a culminated effort between, you know, my staff and all the administration and the law director's office and yourself, so I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So suspension, and I have myself a second. All right. The next is temporary ordinance 34-20. This is coming through finance. This is for the issuance and sale of notes in the amount of $1.5 million in anticipation of the construction and replacement of the Miller Park Water Treatment Plant. It's for the Miller Park Water Treatment Plant renovation. I don't know what else to say about it. Denise, you wanna help me?
So a couple things on this. This includes the Wiley Road Waterline Loop construction and engineering also, which is why it's 1.5 million. And you'll see that in the description. We don't want this to appear as a 2020 debt because of the cascading carryovers and time coverage and all those things that go with that. We have the sale for January. Our plan to pay it back would be, for the Miller Park portion of the note, we can roll it into our OWDA design loan later this summer. And then the other one will be paying interest and then trying to pay it down over the next few years as Mike can open up money in the water. The South Water Plant debt will be falling off in 22 and 23, so we got a little bit of cushion there.
Okay, and I have this for 3 readings.
2 would be better, but 3 is fine.
Any questions for Denise? Thanks for coming to my rescue.
Thank you.
Mr. Stoughton, I have you a second. Okay. Do we have any other ordinances coming before finance? Okay. Departmental updates. Do we have any? Oh, Mr. Mayor.
One really quick one. We did close today on the 2 properties on Lawrence Street, 730 and 740, which is adjacent to the Lawrence Street water treatment plant, and also the house on the corner of Maple and Lawrence, which will be demolished, and that intersection will be redone to make the turn off of Lawrence onto northbound Maple much easier and improve the line of sight so you can pull out without taking your life in your hands. So that closing was this afternoon on both of those properties.
Great. Excellent. Okay, any other departmental updates? Okay, I will turn the floor over to President Wolf for tonight's meeting prep.
Thank you very much. We have one additional ordinance to address tonight, temporary ordinance 35-20, which is approving the editing and inclusion of ordinances as part of our codified ordinances of Lancaster. This coming through Law Committee. Mr. Hall.
Yeah, just real quickly, and Teresa sent a packet out last Friday, an extensive packet of almost 200 pages. The majority of those pages dealt with extensive but minor coding changes that have been made throughout the year, and the city is asking that we suspend on ratifying those changes. And I might defer to Randall to see if he would like to make any additional comments.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Just all I'd sum up is, this is our cleanup piece, if you will, from the legal side or whatever. This is going to capture not only the changes that City Council made to our own codified ordinances, but changes that affected our codified ordinances through the state legislature. A lot of our criminal code, as you may know, mirrors the Ohio Revised Code, so those changes we have to then capture within our codified ordinances. So, like the fact that you don't need 2 license plates anymore, just for those of you that have taken them off already. So.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Law Director. Thank you, Mr. Hall. So what's your pleasure on this?
We'd like to suspend, and Mr. McDaniel will be my second.
Very good. We will ask for suspension tonight with Mr. McDaniel as the second. I believe that wraps up meeting prep for this evening. I will pass back to you, Madam Chairwoman.
Okay, thank you very much. Other items for finance. I have 2. One is, are there any additional questions on the budget? This is your last chance.
Second to last chance.
Second to last chance. Second to last chance, yes, that's correct. We had a special meeting, we had a lot of detail, yes. Ms.
Actually,
Steve?
I will be addressing mine during the vote. On the regular meeting is what I'll be addressing my concerns. Where more people are watching.
Alrighty. Okay. Thank you very much. And then, for Clerk Sandy, we do have some still outstanding minutes.
Correct.
And let me look at my picture. Took. So we have IT committee, we have law committee, you've already addressed your safety committee and service committee.
She already.
Okay, awesome. Is there anything else to come before finance? If not, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn,
I make a motion, we adjourn.
and we are adjourned at 6:36.
The regular meeting of Lancaster City Council will begin at approximately 6:40.
Hey, Corey, I do have 2 pieces for you to sign now.
There is no place like Lancaster, Ohio, and Fairfield County, and like you, I am proud to call them home. As a longtime resident of Lancaster and graduate of Lancaster High School, this community is important to me, and I want to provide superior customer service, professionalism, integrity, and honesty at the Connor Insurance Agency. I am committed to supporting local programs and projects through my volunteer work and board membership with several organizations. It has been a great honor to work with all the first responders throughout Lancaster, Fairfield County, and the state of Ohio to put on Kids and Cops Day, to be a part of Shop with a Cop alongside the Lancaster Police Department and JFS, and to help Lancaster Public Education Foundation raise funds to support our local public schools and teachers. These men and women work hard to protect and support our community, and I would like to take this moment to say thank you for all they do. My goal as a business owner and insurance agent is to provide my clients with the most appropriate services and coverage for their needs at a competitive rate. As an independent agent, I have several carriers to choose from so I can customize your insurance coverage to fit your needs and desires. I strive to make sure there are no gaps in your coverage that could be harmful, and just as important, that you are not overinsured. I look forward to serving your insurance needs now and in the future. At Connor Insurance, we are here to serve you by protecting what is important to you. Please contact my office at 740-654-2848 for a full list of services and carriers, or visit my website, ConnorInsuranceAgency.com.
Swing into the Carriage Company and check out our sweet deals.
If you're looking for the best selection of clean, quality used vehicles, look no further than the Carriage Company. You'll feel secure with your purchase, knowing all vehicles undergo an extensive safety and service check prior to the sale. And all vehicles can be viewed online at carriagecompany.com. The Carriage Company, located at 1031 North Memorial Drive in Lancaster.
Wait!
The Frankie Smith Funeral Home and Crematory in Lancaster and the Johnson Smith Funeral Home in Baltimore have a long and wonderful history of serving our community. Feel free to give us a call at 740-653-0652. Stop in and see us at either of our 2 locations, 405 North Columbus Street in Lancaster and 207 South Main Street in Baltimore. Respect for tradition, regard for change.
Good evening. Welcome to Lancaster City Council. Please join me in a word of prayer. Father, here we are once again, ready to do the work that you've called us to do and that the people of Lancaster have elected us to do. Tonight we are moving ever more closer to the end of another year. A difficult and challenging year for many in many respects, and yet in the midst of the challenge and difficulty, you have been with us and you have blessed us, and we are so thankful. I pray that you would continue to be with us tonight, be with all of those who are suffering with some sort of illness. We pray that you would be with them, be with doctors and nurses, first responders, researchers, scientists, those working on vaccine distribution. We just pray that you would continue to help us and move us closer, not only to the end of a year, but to the end of this pandemic as well. Be with us tonight in the work that's set before us. May we do what is in the best interest of the citizens of Lancaster, and we'll give you all the praise and glory in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. I hereby call this meeting of Lancaster City Council to order. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Yeah, if everyone can make sure your microphone is on, and then remember when you're speaking to speak into it, that way people at home can hear. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbitt.
Here.
Mrs. Downauer.
Here.
Mr. Hall.
Here.
Mr. James.
Here.
Mr. Matlin.
Here.
Mr. McDaniel.
Here.
Mr. Schoonover.
Here.
Mr. Stoughton.
Here.
And Mrs. Teener.
Here.
Let the record reflect that all 9 members of Lancaster City Council are with us this evening. Reading and disposing of the journal.
I'd like to present the regular meeting minutes dated November 23rd, 2020.
Mr. President, I would like to make a motion to receive and file the journal.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to receive and file the journal. Discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Reports of city officials.
Series of emails regarding number of major pieces submitted by President Uhl. Email dated December 2nd, 2020 regarding final version of budget submitted by Mayor David Scheffler. Email dated December 7th, 2020 regarding budget submitted by Mrs. Bobbitt. Email dated December 8th, 2020 regarding the water pollution control agenda submitted by Mr. James. Email dated December 8th, 2020 regarding the 2021 code enforcement meeting dates submitted by Mr. Matlin. Email dated December 10th, 2020 regarding code enforcement cart cleanup submitted by Mr. Matlin. And finally, an email dated December 14th, 2020 regarding the Finance Committee agenda submitted by Mrs. Downauer.
Mr. President, I would like to make a motion to receive and file the reports of city officials.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to receive and file reports of city officials. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Are there any communications?
There are 2. Email and a disc dated December 1st, 2020 regarding application of the Ohio Power Company for an increase in electric distribution rates. And it lists 3 different case numbers. Case number 20-585EL AIR, 20-586EL ATA, and 20-587EL AAM, submitted by the Ohio Public Utilities Commission. And finally, an email dated December 7th, 2020 regarding the petition packets submitted by Leslie Morgan, Election Services Senior Election Officer, or Official, from the Fairfield County Board of Elections.
Mr. President, I would like to make a motion to receive and file the communications.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to receive and file communications. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Are there any petitions or memorials this evening?
There are none to be presented.
During this time at Lancaster City Council, we set time aside to allow the voters and taxpayers of the city to address City Council on any item or issue that they would like. Is there anyone who would like to address Lancaster City Council this evening? If not, we'll thank those who are here in attendance and also those who are watching either online or at home on television as well for joining us tonight. Are there reports of standing committees?
There are 2. Finance Committee meeting dated November 23rd, 2020, and a special Finance Committee meeting dated December 7th, 2020, submitted by Mrs. Downauer, and the Economic Development meeting dated September 17, 2020, submitted by Mr. McDaniel.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion to receive and file the reports of standing committees.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to receive and file the reports of standing committees. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Are there reports of special committees?
There are none to be presented.
We have no public hearings this evening, so we'll move to the reading of resolutions, beginning with temporary resolution 118-20.
A resolution to authorize the Service Safety Director to enter into an engineering contract offered by Mr. James and seconded by Mrs. Teener.
Mr. James.
Yes, we discussed this certainly in the Finance Committee meeting, and I think it's time for us to pass this legislation and move on with it.
Very good. What's your pleasure?
Mr. President, at this time, I'd like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record resolution temporarily numbered 118-20.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 118-20. Discussion, Mr. James.
Nothing further?
Discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbitt.
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour.
Yes.
Mr. Hall.
Yes.
Mr. James.
Yes.
Mr. Matlin.
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel.
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover.
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton.
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Temporary resolution 118-20 passes 9-0. Temporary resolution 119-20.
A resolution to authorize the Service Safety Director to enter into a contract for inspection services offered by Mr. James, seconded by Mr. Hall.
Mr. James.
Once again, we discussed this in the Finance Committee meeting, and to authorize the city safety director to enter into a contract for $140,000 for inspection services. And at this time, Mr. President, I would like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon our written record resolution temporarily numbered 119-20.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 119-20. Discussion, Mr. Hall. Sorry, Mr. James.
Nothing further.
I was looking at him and saying him. All right. Any discussion on the motion to pass?
We both have one here.
That's true. Me as well, so I understand. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbitt.
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour.
Yes.
Mr. Hall.
Yes.
Mr. James.
Yes.
Mr. Matlin.
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel.
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover.
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton.
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Temporary resolution 119-20 passes 9-0. Temporary resolution 121-20.
A resolution to make appropriations for the current 2021 budget expenses and other expenditures of the City of Lancaster, State of Ohio, for the fiscal year 2021, and to establish line item transfers authorities for city departments. Offered by Mrs. Bobbitt, seconded by Mr. Stoughton.
Ms. Bobbitt.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to make a motion to replace temporary resolution number 121 star with temporary resolution 121-20 star.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to replace temporary resolution 121-20 star and amend it to 121-20 star as given to the clerk in writing prior to tonight's meeting. Discussion on the motion to amend, Ms. Bobbitt.
Everyone should have a copy, this fresh copy of the budget.
Very good. Further discussion on the motion to amend. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbitt.
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour.
Yes.
Mr. Hall.
Yes.
Mr. James.
Yes.
Mr. Matlin.
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel.
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover.
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton.
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Motion to amend passes 9-0. We now have before us temporary resolution 121-20 star. Ms. Bobbitt.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution number 121-20 star.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 121-20 star. Discussion, Ms. Bobbitt.
The only discussion that I would like to say is, we've come a long way with this budget. We've had, as Holly mentioned, we've had a couple different finance meetings in regard to the budget. And I just wanted to add, there's some personnel matters that aren't reflected in this budget, and I know we have a committee together, and I would hoping that we get that taken care of in January of 2021.
Thank you, Ms. Thank you, Ms. Bobbin. I'm sorry, were you finished?
I'm finished, yes,
Okay.
thank you.
You're welcome, thank you. Further discussion on the motion? Yes, Ms. Teener?
Yes, actually, the budget really isn't terrible. However, I was planning on voting actually yes for it, but there's one matter I think needs to be brought up, and I've written something so I don't forget. Points. The enterprise departments are paying for a new non-union position in the Utilities Collections Department. However, there are non-union women in the enterprise department still not getting the appropriate range increases they had been promised when they were removed from the union 9, 10, or 11 years ago. However, we are going to have a special committee chosen after the first of the year to discuss this matter. There's no reason these range increases cannot happen now with this budget. Therefore, I am voting no on this budget. This costs the enterprise departments approximately $4,000 to $5,000 out of their budget. These monies will not come out of the general fund. Department heads, to my knowledge, have budgeted for these women. Now, I'm going to do a little bit of kind of reminding people things that we have done that has come out of enterprise funds for maybe possibly, well, it was the utilities department. A few years ago, there was an upgrade to their office. It was supposed to cost $40,000. When it was said and done, it cost over $81,000. Income tax department was able to hire a part-time permanent position when it had always been a seasonal position, and that, I believe, comes out of the general fund. Transit is receiving range increases. That's not out of the general fund. Those are grant funds. So I really don't understand why, these women, we can't do this now. I don't know why they have to wait. I don't know why there has to be a special committee for this when we all know they deserve it and they were promised that. And the other thing out of the general fund that is coming out now, this is something I guess I do have a problem with. $15,000 for feral cats for the TNR program coming out of the general fund with this budget. But an enterprise fund that is not paying people out of a general fund, they're using their own monies, cannot give these women raises now. And I know we all deserve, they deserve it, and there's no reason that we have to have a special committee to even discuss this. And I'm voting no.
Thank you, Ms. Teener. Is there anyone else who would like to discuss this evening? Yes, Mr. Stoughton.
Call me a missus.
I did not.
I think you did.
I did not.
Yeah, that's always
I
me.
had a brief pause to take a breath in before I finished the
We've called you Madam President.
Miss
Thank you.
Stoughton.
All right, so I want to offer my budget, just my thoughts. First of all, this budget is a good budget. The budget process is much improved with the new application. Obviously, it's much cleaner, much better. It flows much better. That's a good thing. I want to talk a little bit about the non-union pay increases, and the whole problem there, just for the listening public, is those positions took zeros a lot of times as we were trying to pass a new income tax to fund fund general fund and other operations. Well, those people in the non-union budget, even though they're not general fund, get caught up in that. So the administration has committed to righting that wrong, I believe. Mayor Sheffield, please. I didn't call you that.
You thought Miss was bad.
I didn't call, but nevertheless, there is a 3% cost of living increase in the budget for those folks right out of the gate. Now, I understand to Mrs. Teener's point, that's certainly not enough. They've been left behind. But there is a commitment from the administration, from the Service Safety Director, from the Council President, from this council, a lot of folks to basically rectify and right that wrong. And maybe I'll even defer to you or yield to you if I could there, President Uhl, to kind of talk about the process. But I don't think there's anyone around this council table that is against making pay corrections in 2021 after the committee does its work. So if you wouldn't mind kind of piling on a little bit, that'd be great.
Sure. Yeah, the mayor has requested that we put together a special committee that will look at this exact issue, at non-union compensation across the city. And so we're looking at a group of professionals, both in government and outside of government, who are going to come together. They're currently being recruited. Our goal is to have our first meeting in January, with the goal of at least by July, and hopefully sooner than that, we propose to this council how to remedy and rectify that exact issue. And so that is sort of the timeline. And I'll just go ahead and state right now that from City Council, I would like, and I've not talked with her about this, but I'm going to put her on the spot, Ms. Bobbitt, to serve on this committee, as well as Gretchen, our Human Resource Coordinator Director here in Lancaster, and then a number of other people, all of whom will be recruited and ready to meet beginning in January. So I don't think anyone disagrees with what you're suggesting. I think it's a little bit larger than just the women in the enterprise funds that you're talking about. I think across the city there are a number of folks who have taken zeros, who are non-union employees, and we want to address it comprehensively all at once. I think there wasn't time to do so and include it in this budget. I agree with Mr. Stoughton. This is a good budget. A lot of work was put into this budget by a great many people, including this council. This is the end of my 5th year, and some have been around a little less and some have been around much, much longer. But I don't remember this council ever being, in my short time, so engaged and involved in the process. We had 5 meetings where we've discussed that, and that doesn't double up finance and council meetings. I'm counting those as one. And so a multitude of meetings, as well as great transparency by the mayor, and I know several of us took the opportunity to meet with him to discuss those issues personally and have our issues addressed. So that's the plan for the committee, and I just want to say thank you to the mayor, to the safety service director, and to each department head who worked so hard to put this together, and to this council for your engagement and involvement in the process as we move this budget toward finalization. So with that, thank you, Mr. Stoughton. I'll send it back to you in case you want to close up with anything before we move on to others.
No, my close-up is, I think it's a good budget. We should support this budget and all the commitments we've made going forward to rectify, past problems. So, nevertheless, thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Stoughton. Further discussion on the motion to pass? As Ms. Downhour stated earlier, this is your last chance before we vote. Okay. Not seeing any, please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbitt?
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
No.
Temporary Resolution 121-20 passes 8-1. We now have second reading on a series of resolutions, beginning with Temporary Resolution 123-20.
Pages are sticking together, sorry.
No problem.
A resolution to create a new fund for the .45 Police and Fire Levy 2021 Fund 2051, and to set up revenue and expense accounts, offered by Mrs. Downhour, seconded by Mrs. Bobbitt.
Ms. Downhour.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the third reading of resolution temporarily numbered 123-20.
Second?
A motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the third reading of Temporary Resolution 123-20. Discussion, Ms. Downhour.
I will save it.
Discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbitt?
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Motion to suspend passes 9-0. Ms. Downhour.
Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 123-20.
Second?
Motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record 123, Temporary Resolution 123-20. Discussion, Ms. Downhour.
Yes, thank you. This resolution is so that we can establish the fund for the .45 police and fire levy.
Very good. Further discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbitt?
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Temporary Resolution 123-20 passes 9-0. Temporary Resolution 132-20.
A resolution authorizing the mayor to enter into a contract with the Fairfield County General Health District for public health services, offered by Mrs. Downhour, seconded by Mr. Stoughton.
Ms. Downhour.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the third reading of resolution temporarily numbered 132-20.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the third reading of temporary resolution 132-20. Ms. Downhour,
I will save it.
discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbit,
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour,
Yes.
Mr. Hall,
Yes.
Mr. James,
Yes.
Mr. Matlin,
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel,
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover,
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton,
Yes.
and Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Motion to suspend passes 9-0. Ms. Downhour,
Mr. President, I would like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution number 132-20.
Second?
we have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 132-20. Discussion, Ms. Downhour.
Yes, thank you. This resolution is for the contract with the Fairfield County Health Department, and it is for a one-year contract totaling approximately $333,296.11.
Very good. Further discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbit,
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour,
Yes.
Mr. Hall,
Yes.
Mr. James,
Yes.
Mr. Matlin,
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel,
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover,
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton,
Yes.
and Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Temporary resolution 132-20 passes 9-0. We're now at first reading on a series of resolutions, beginning with temporary resolution 133-20.
A resolution to authorize the Service Safety Director to advertise for, select, and enter into a contract with a qualified consultant for inspection of the 2021 Street Improvement Program paving, offered by Mr. Schoonover, seconded by Mrs. Downhour.
Mr. Schoonover,
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the second and third readings of temporary resolution 133-20.
Second?
we have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the second and third reading of temporary resolution 133-20. Discussion, Mr. Schoonover.
No, thank you.
Discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbit,
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour,
Yes.
Mr. Hall,
Yes.
Mr. James,
Yes.
Mr. Matlin,
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel,
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover,
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton,
Yes.
and Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Motion to suspend passes 9-0. Mr. Schoonover.
Mr. President, I would like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 133-20.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 133-20. Discussion, Mr. Schoonover.
This is, one of two pieces for the 2021 paving project, and we're kind of jumping out here quickly to, the getting is good, so we're moving a little faster than normal to take advantage of hopefully some good bids doing it earlier in the year.
Very good. Further discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbit,
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour,
Yes.
Mr. Hall,
Yes.
Mr. James,
Yes.
Mr. Matlin,
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel,
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover,
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton,
Yes.
and Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Temporary resolution 133-20 passes 9-0. Temporary resolution 134-20.
A resolution to authorize the Service Safety Director to advertise for, select, and enter into a contract with a qualified contractor for resurfacing projects known as the 2020 Street Improvement Program, offered by Mr. Schoonover, seconded by Mr. James.
Mr. Schoonover.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the second and third readings of temporary resolution 134-20.
I second that motion.
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the second and third reading of temporary resolution 134-20. Mr. Schoonover.
Nothing at this time.
Discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbit,
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour,
Yes.
Mr. Hall,
Yes.
Mr. James,
Yes.
Mr. Matlin,
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel,
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover,
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton,
Yes.
and Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Motion to suspend passes 9-0. Mr. Schoonover.
Mr. President, I would like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 134-20.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 134-20. Mr. Schoonover.
So this is the contractor bidding piece for the 2021 street program, and again, hoping to go out to bid earlier than normal to take advantage of some better pricing.
Excellent. We like better pricing. Yep. Further discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbitt,
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour,
Yes.
Mr. Hall,
Yes.
Mr. James,
Yes.
Mr. Matlin,
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel,
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover,
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton,
Yes.
and Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Temporary Resolution 134-20 passes 9-0. Temporary Resolution 135-20.
A resolution authorizing the Service Safety Director to enter into an engineering agreement for the preliminary study and report phase of the Miller Park Water Treatment Plant Replacement Project, offered by Mr. James and seconded by Mr. Hall.
Mr. James?
As we discussed in the Finance Committee meeting, it's now time to take a hard look at replacing the water treatment plant there on Memorial Drive, mainly because of its age, and secondly, to increase our ability to remain competitive as a city that can provide the water to new businesses that might want to actually engage in business here. So this will be the first of two readings.
First of two readings on Temporary Resolution 135-20. Temporary Resolution 136-20.
A resolution authorizing the Service Safety Director to enter into an engineering agreement for the Wiley Road Water Loop Project, offered by Mr. James and seconded by Mrs. Teener.
Mr. James?
Once again, as we discussed in the Finance Committee meeting, this is a particular help on the Wiley Road project, the loop for providing additional water to some of the areas to enhance, once again, the ability for us to remain competitive to attract new businesses. And this will be the first of two readings.
First of two readings on Temporary Resolution 136-20. Temporary Resolution 137-20.
A resolution to authorize the Service Safety Director to advertise for bids and enter into a contract for the Northeast Main Replacement Project, offered by Mrs. Teener, seconded by Mrs. Bobbitt.
Ms. Teener?
First of three readings.
First of three readings on Temporary Resolution 137-20. Temporary Resolution 138-20.
A resolution approving and authorizing the mayor to submit to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development Lancaster's amendment to its fiscal year 2020 annual action plan to include community development block grant coronavirus funds, offered by Mr. McDaniel, seconded by Mr. Stoughton.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes, Mr. President, I would like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the second and third reading of resolution temporarily numbered 138-20.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the second and third reading of Temporary Resolution 138-20. Discussion, Mr. McDaniel.
Not now.
Discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbitt?
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Motion to suspend passes 9-0. Mr. McDaniel?
Yes, Mr. President, I would like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record resolution temporarily numbered 138-20.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record Temporary Resolution 138-20. Discussion, Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President. We received additional CDBG funds specifically for pandemic-related expenses. We will be able to use these funds to assist citizens and businesses within the community, specifically small businesses with 25 or less employees, to help with expenses such as rent, mortgage, utilities. Also, individual homeowners, low-income homeowners that are struggling with possible foreclosure and/or other issues related to the pandemic. This will allow us to fund those programs, and this is part of our CBDG program.
Thank you, Mr. McDaniel. Further discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbitt?
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Temporary Resolution 138-20 passes 9-0. Temporary Resolution 139-20.
A resolution to enter into final legislation for an LPA ODOT project agreement for the construction of sidewalks on the east side of Sheridan Drive from Frederick Street to Medill Elementary School, offered by Mr. Schoonover, seconded by Mrs. Downhour.
Mr. Schoonover.
Mr. President, I would like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the second and third reading of Temporary Resolution 139-20.
Second?
A motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the second and third reading of Temporary Resolution 139-20. Discussion, Mr. Schoonover.
No thanks.
Discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbit?
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Motion to suspend passes 9-0. Mr. Schoonover.
Mr. President, I would like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 13920.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 139-20. Mr. Schoonover.
As part of our Safe Route to School program, we're going to be able to complete I would call it the second half of this project, sidewalk from Medill down to Frederick Street with no city dollars involved. It's a ODOT project, and they've asked us to get some paperwork back pretty quickly, hence the suspension and asking for passage right now.
Very good. Further discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbit?
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Temporary resolution 139-20 passes 9-0. Temporary resolution 140-20.
A resolution to amend appropriation budgets, then amend the certificate of other sources and appropriations with the county auditor. Offered by Mrs. Downhour, seconded by Mr. Stoughton.
Mrs. Downhour.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the second and third reading of resolution temporarily numbered 140-20.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the second and third reading of temporary resolution 140-20. Ms. Downhour.
I'll save it.
Discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbit?
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Motion to suspend passes 9-0. Ms. Downhour.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record resolution temporarily numbered 140-20.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 140-20. Ms. Downhour.
Yes, thank you. This resolution is required by audit to bring our expense budgets back in line with the cash that was received during the year. So that is why you'll see some increases and some decreases.
Very good. Thank you, Ms. Downhour. Further discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbit?
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Temporary resolution 140-20 passes 9-0. Are there any other resolutions to come before Lancaster City Council this evening? If not, we'll move to the reading of ordinances, beginning with the second reading of temporary ordinance 26-20.
An ordinance to establish the benefits, titles, and compensation for Fairfield County Municipal Court management and professional personnel employed by the city of Lancaster, Ohio for the year 2021, and to declare an emergency. Offered by Mrs. Downhour, seconded by Mr. Stoughton.
Ms. Downhour.
Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the third reading of ordinance temporarily numbered 26-20.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the third reading of temporary ordinance 26-20. Discussion, Ms. Downhour.
I will save it.
Discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbit?
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Excuse me. Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Motion to suspend passes 9-0. Ms. Downhour.
Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record ordinance temporarily numbered 26-20.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary ordinance 26-20. Discussion, Ms. Downhour.
Yes, thank you. This ordinance is the pay ordinance for the management and professional personnel at the municipal court.
Further discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbit?
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Temporary ordinance 26-20 passes 9-0. Temporary ordinance 27-20.
An ordinance to establish the benefits, titles, and compensation for Fairfield County Municipal Court judicial and probation personnel employed by the City of Lancaster, Ohio for the year 2021 and to declare an emergency, offered by Mrs. Downhour, seconded by Mrs. Bobbitt.
Ms. Downhour?
Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the third reading of ordinance temporarily numbered 27-20.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the third reading of temporary ordinance 27-20. Discussion, Ms. Downhour.
No.
Discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbitt.
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour.
Yes.
Mr. Hall.
Yes.
Mr. James.
Yes.
Mr. Matlin.
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel.
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover.
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton.
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Motion to suspend passes 9-0. Ms. Downhour.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record ordinance temporarily numbered 27-20.
Second?
A motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary ordinance 27-20. Ms. Downhour?
Yes, thank you. This ordinance is the pay ordinance for the municipal court personnel for 2021.
Thank you, Ms. Downhour. Further discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbitt.
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour.
Yes.
Mr. Hall.
Yes.
Mr. James.
Yes.
Mr. Matlin.
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel.
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover.
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton.
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Temporary ordinance 27-20 passes 9-0. Temporary ordinance 28-20.
An ordinance to establish the benefits, titles, and compensation for management and professional personnel employed by the City of Lancaster, Ohio for the year 2021 and to declare an emergency, offered by Mrs. Downhour, seconded by Mr. Stoughton.
Ms. Downhour?
Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the third reading of ordinance temporarily numbered 28-20.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the third reading of temporary ordinance 28-20. Discussion, Ms. Downhour?
No, thank you.
Discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbitt.
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour.
Yes.
Mr. Hall.
Yes.
Mr. James.
Yes.
Mr. Matlin.
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel.
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover.
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton.
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Motion to suspend passes 9-0. Ms. Downhour?
Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record ordinance temporarily numbered 28-20.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary ordinance 28-20. Excuse me.
We're gonna do this a lot.
That was, yeah. Ms. Downhour?
Yes, thank you. This is the annual pay ordinance for the management and professional personnel for the City of Lancaster for
Very-
2021.
Very good. Thank you, Ms. Downhour. Further discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbitt.
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour.
Yes.
Mr. Hall.
Yes.
Mr. James.
Yes.
Mr. Matlin.
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel.
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover.
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton.
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Temporary ordinance 28-20 passes 9-0. Temporary ordinance 29-20.
An ordinance to establish benefits, titles, and compensation for those employees who are not members of the recognized bargaining units employed by the City of Lancaster, Ohio for the year 2021 and to declare an emergency, offered by Mrs. Downhour, seconded by Mrs. Bobbitt.
Ms. Downhour?
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the third reading of ordinance temporarily numbered 29-20.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the third reading of temporary ordinance 29-20. Discussion, Ms. Downhour?
No.
Discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbitt.
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour.
Yes.
Mr. Hall.
Yes.
Mr. James.
Yes.
Mr. Matlin.
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel.
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover.
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton.
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Motion to suspend passes 9-0. Ms. Downhour?
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record ordinance temporarily numbered 29-20.
Second?
A motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary ordinance 29-20. Discussion, Ms. Downhour?
Yes, thank you. This ordinance is the annual pay ordinance for non-union personnel for the City of Lancaster for 2021.
Further discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbitt.
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour.
Yes.
Mr. Hall.
Yes.
Mr. James.
Yes.
Mr. Matlin.
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel.
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover.
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton.
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Temporary ordinance 29-20 passes 9-0. Temporary ordinance 30-20.
An ordinance to establish benefits, titles, and compensation for transit personnel employed by the City of Lancaster, Ohio for the year 2021 and to declare an emergency, offered it.
Offered to do.
If we can't laugh at ourselves, who can we laugh at, right? Okay. Offered by Mrs. Downhour, seconded by Mr. Stoughton.
Ms. Downhour.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the third reading of ordinance temporary numbered 30-20.
Second?
A motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the third reading of temporary ordinance 30-20. Discussion, Ms. Downhour.
Not at this time.
Discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbitt?
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Motion to suspend passes 9-0. Ms. Downhour.
Yes, Mr. President, I would like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record ordinance temporarily numbered 30-20.
Second?
A motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary ordinance 30-20. Ms. Downhour.
Yes, thank you. This ordinance is the annual pay ordinance for transit personnel for 2021.
Thank you, Ms. Downhour. Further discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbitt?
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Temporary ordinance 30-20 passes 9-0. Temporary ordinance 31-20.
An ordinance to establish the benefits, titles, and compensation for the Information Technology Administrator, Office of the Clerk of Court, employed by the City of Lancaster, Ohio, commencing the first pay period of 2021, and to declare an emergency. Offered by Mrs. Downhour, seconded by Mrs. Bobbitt.
Ms. Downhour.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the third reading of ordinance temporarily numbered 31-20.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the third reading of temporary ordinance 31-20. Discussion, Ms. Downhour.
Not at this time.
Discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbitt?
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Motion to suspend passes 9-0. Ms. Downhour.
Mr. President, I would like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record ordinance temporarily numbered 31-20.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary ordinance 31-20. Discussion, Ms. Downhour.
Yes, thank you. This is the final pay ordinance of the night, and this is for the Information Technology Administrator at the municipal court.
Very good. Further discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbitt?
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Temporary ordinance 31-20 passes 9-0. We now have first reading on a series of ordinances, beginning with temporary ordinance 33-20.
An ordinance to accept property for the Edie Road Safety Project PID 108470 and to declare an emergency. Offered by Mr. Schoonover and seconded by Mrs. Downhour.
Mr. Schoonover.
Mr. President, I would like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the second and third readings of temporary ordinance 33-20.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the second and third reading of temporary ordinance 33-20. Discussion, Mr. Schoonover.
Not at this time.
Discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbitt?
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Motion to suspend passes 9-0. Mr. Schoonover.
Mr. President, I would like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary ordinance 33-20.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary ordinance 33-20. Discussion, Mr. Schoonover.
Briefly, this is the last piece in a long, tedious process of acquiring the pieces we need to move forward with expanding Edie Road from Columbus Street to Memorial Drive. So excited to move this forward.
You wouldn't think such a small piece of road would require so much work, but it
Yeah,
has.
yeah.
Right.
Very good. Further discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbitt?
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Temporary ordinance 3-20 passes 9-0. Wait a second. Is that right?
133-20.
Oh, man, I thought we had a lot more, but I was looking at the wrong page. This is great. Temporary ordinance 34-20.
Well, this is a long one, so.
Yeah, I'm ready. Go.
An ordinance providing for the issuance and sale of notes in the maximum principal amount of $1,500,000 in anticipation of the issuance of bonds for the purpose of paying the cost of construction and replacement of the Miller Park Water Treatment Plant and the acquisition of real property and appurtenances necessary therefore, and the acquisition, construction, and installation of wells, raw water distribution piping, approximately 5,300 feet of water lines, new fire hydrants and appurtenances along Wiley Road and Magna Avenue between certain termini, each including design and engineering work, and together with all necessary appurtenances thereto, and declaring an emergency. Offered it again by Mrs. Downer, seconded by Mr. Stoughton.
We'll blame Law Director Allum for making you read all those words. Ms. Downhour.
First of two readings, please.
Oh, you get to do it again. First
That's
of two
all right.
readings on temporary ordinance
Time
34-20.
to rest.
There you go. All right. Temporary ordinance 35-20.
An ordinance approving the editing and inclusion of certain ordinances as part of the various component codes of the codified ordinances of Lancaster, Ohio, offered by Mr. Hall and seconded by Mr. McDaniel.
Mr. Hall.
Yes, Mr. President, I would like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the second and third readings of ordinance temporarily numbered 35-20.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the second and third reading of temporary ordinance 35-20. Mr. Hall.
I'll wait.
Discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbitt?
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Motion to suspend passes 9-0. Mr. Hall.
Yes, Mr. President, I would like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter and point the written record ordinance temporarily numbered 35-20.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary ordinance 35-20. Mr. Hall.
Yes, Mr. President, as noted in our Finance Committee meeting, this motion pertains to cleaning up city code. Many of these issues have been talked about throughout the year. There are other pieces that bring our code in alignment with changes in state code, and I think we need to suspend and move forward.
Very good. Thank you. Further discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbitt?
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Temporary ordinance 35-20 passes 9-0. Are there any further ordinances to come before Lancaster City Council this evening? If not, we'll move to tabled legislation. Is there any action on tabled legislation this evening? Yes, Ms. Teener.
Yes. Madam President, oops.
Thank you.
I'm reading from this.
Yes. Yes.
That was on purpose.
Yeah, I know it was. It's all right.
No, it's right. Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council remove from the table temporary resolution 4520.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to take from the table temporary resolution 45-20. This motion is not debatable. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbitt?
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Temporary resolution 45-20 has been taken from the table. It is now before us. Ms. Teener.
Mr. President, I would like to make a motion that council withdraw temporary resolution 4520.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to withdraw temporary resolution 45-20. This also is not debatable. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbitt?
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Temporary resolution 45-20 has been withdrawn. Is there any unfinished business tonight to come before Lancaster City Council? If not, we'll move on to new business. I have several items for us to address tonight. We'll begin with the appointment of Laura Tussing. You received from the mayor information about his appointment of Ms. Tussing to, I forget, what do we appoint her to? To the Port Authority. Thank you very much. We received that information, a little bit of biographical information about Ms. Tussing. Is there a motion to appoint Ms. Tussing to the Port Authority this evening?
So moved.
We have a motion from Mr. McDaniel. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a second from Ms. Teener. Discussion. For those who may not know Ms. Tussing, who are watching, we all received the information. Ms. Tussing is currently the president of Park National Bank here in Fairfield County, and I think makes a great addition to the Port Authority. So thank you, Mayor, for putting forward such a qualified candidate for that position. I always forget if we need roll call or roll call. Very good. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbitt?
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Very good. Motion to appoint Ms. Tussing passes 9-0. Mr. Mayor, please pass along our appreciation for her willingness to serve in that position. One of the other things I wanted to discuss was the Compensation Review Committee. We really already did that, so I'll just reiterate our work will begin soon, and we're hope to get something to this council for consideration as quickly as possible in 2021. I had a request from Amanda Everett, who's the director of Destination Downtown Lancaster, for this council to consider legislation that would limit the fees that third-party delivery services like Grubhub or DoorDash or something like that is able to charge restaurants in the city of Lancaster. This comes on the heels of many of our local restaurants for some period of time this year being very reliant on those delivery services to keep their business doors open and their employees employed. We would not be the first city to do this. The city of Columbus has passed similar legislation. My recommendation would be for the Standing Committee on Law to take this matter under review and to consider whether or not legislation can come forward that might help us to address this. I've spoken with Law Director Ullum, and there are some issues and concerns for the Law Committee to work through before this comes to City Council. Chief among them are how this could be enforced. The city of Columbus passed legislation that for a period of, I think, 120 days or until the state of emergency ends, that this would be in effect. It would limit fees to 15%. Businesses would not be allowed to make that up on the backs of their drivers, and so they're going to just have to eat that margin. I've spoken with a couple of business owners who are obviously very supportive of this. Currently, they pay 30%, and you and I pay 13% as customers when we order. So 43% is going to the company. Hey, listen, that's how it works. However, when our local businesses are so dependent on that service right now, I think this is worth taking under consideration. Maybe legislation will come forward, maybe it won't. I believe Ms. Everett will be here to speak in favor of it, and the Chamber of Commerce was in favor of us at least researching this idea, though they were non-committal on any sort of support for legislation until they had an opportunity to review it. So, Mr. Hall, I'd like to ask for you and your committees as quickly as possible in the new year to bring something forward that this council could consider, and we can kind of go from there.
Happy to do it.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll send you information, and Mr. Ullum has it too, about the Columbus legislation, and that'll set sort of a model for what could be if you would decide to bring that
That sounds
forward.
great.
The only other thing I'll mention here before I give off to others for new business is this year we have worked to pass, by my count, and it's a rough count, more than 170 pieces of legislation. More than 170 pieces of legislation, including some pretty significant legislation, including things like the Timber Top annexation and zoning changes, the Memorial Drive changes, the income tax piece, dissolution of the CIC, LDOT purchase of property at the corner of Maple and Lawrence Street to expand our right-of-way, a mandate for employers to electronically submit documents to the income tax department, and of course tonight a budget that sets forth the spending priorities of the city at somewhere around $130+ million. It's a lot of work in a year that was very challenging and difficult to begin with, and I just wanted to say thank you to each one of you. I know that your phone and emails are probably just ringing off the hook with people thanking you for the work that you do for the city of Lancaster. Listen to Melody, I didn't even get it all out. I know that it can be a thankless job, but I wanted to say thank you for your hard work this year, and I look forward to entering into a new legislative year with you in 2021 as we put this year behind us and the difficulties and challenges of this year behind us and look ahead to great things that will be happening in the city of Lancaster in 2021. So thanks to each of you. Thank you to the Mayor, Service Safety Director, Mr. Wolfinger, Ms. Nettles, and Law Director Allum for each of your contributions and your hard work as well. With that, is there any other new business to come before Lancaster City Council this evening? If not, I'll just close then by wishing each one of you a very Merry Christmas and a happy and healthy and blessed 2021. Please announce our upcoming scheduled meetings.
Scheduled meetings, January the 11th at 6:30 PM and January 25th at 6:30 PM here in council chambers. Upcoming committee meetings for the next 30 days. Economic Development, December 17th at 7:30 AM at the City Hall 1897 Conference Room. Finance, January the 11th at 6 PM here in council chambers. And finally, the Water Pollution Control meeting, January 13th at 8 AM at the City Hall 1897 Conference Room. I would ask if you guys could get your, I know this is an announcement of meetings, but I would ask that you guys get your dates for next year to me so I can get them because I have to post them numerous places, and I would appreciate it.
Very good. Thank you, Clerk. Yes, please, if you haven't submitted your dates for meetings next year, get those to the clerk as soon as possible. Are there any bills this evening?
There's one, PNC, for publication of legislation in the paper, the MNCO paper, $176.35.
Mr. President, I would like to make a motion to pay that bill.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to pay the bill. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Is there a need for an executive session this evening? If not, a motion to adjourn is in order.
Mr. President, I would like to make a motion that we adjourn.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to adjourn the meeting. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you all very much. Have a great night. Merry Christmas.